Hello and welcome to PropNext, the property podcast focused on issues that impact the future of the real estate industry. I'm your host, Gavin Morgan, and in addition to looking forward to today's and future conversations, if you'd like to know a little bit more about me, please look on www.propnext.com. That's www.propnext.com. Or if you'd like to chat privately, drop me a line on gavinrmorgan@propnext.com. That's GAVINRMORGAN @propnext.com on email. I'm now delighted to welcome Alex Bent from Undivided Ventures onto the show. Alex and I have been friends for a long time. We've worked together for many years since we first met and became acquainted properly on the fine ski slopes in Niseko, Japan. Prior to all of that, Alex began his career with Swire Resources in Hong Kong, ran a very successful property redevelopment and regeneration organization called District 15 with some partners in Hong Kong, but has now evolved into a more technology and sustainability oriented space. Alex, welcome onto the show this evening. Great to have you here.
Gavin, thanks so much for having me. It's probably the kindest introduction I've heard you ever give me. So thank you.
I'm sure I could have done better, but thank you. And so, Alex, look, I guess an obvious question for me as well. I mean, you and I have talked many times about this, but District 15 to Undivided, just tell us a little bit about that, please, and what it's about and why at this stage you're branching in that direction.
Yeah, so back in 2003, Hong Kong was coming out of financial crisis and obviously SARS. And with the little money I had, I started buying units around Soho in Hong Kong up until Sai Ying Pun and Kennedy Town, and met my co-founder of District 15 back then. And we met a family office, took our track record to that family office, and started buying whole block buildings, which we then segued into a service department company and sold that business in 2010. So we then started working with a lot of real estate institutions. And one of the things I always talked about with these institutions, even back then, was what we were going to do as far as sustainability with an asset, mostly within the operational side. I didn't really understand the idea of carbon back then, but I understood that we needed to do something for the environment. And so we talked about recycling programs and just small things like that. There was no measurements, there was no benchmarking. And most of the time, to be honest, a lot of the investors we were speaking to sort of patted me on the head and said, that's really cute. Go and build your green wall. But no one was taking it especially seriously. And then you fast forward to about 3 years ago, when a lot of the partners we were working with completely changed the way they're looking at this space. They had very, very long and very, very thought through ESG checklists, which as a manager of real estate assets, we would have to execute on. So I started looking around the world at different technologies that could help with these particular problems, and realized that there were a number of companies who had great management teams, great technologies, but simply didn't have the ability to get into real estate portfolios. And these companies specifically were solving for different areas of sustainability within the real estate sector. And I had been investing in hard assets with my business partner for 16 years and really, really enjoyed it. I really loved changing the way, or at least changing the way in a very small way, how people lived and worked. But that was the thing, is that I could only do it in a small way. I was limited by the amount of capital I could raise. And when you're investing in hard assets, you usually do 2-3 big deals a year, at least in my case. So I noticed that if I really wanted to have an impact on the real estate sector as far as sustainability is concerned, I needed to invest in up-and-coming technology that could scale across portfolios, that could scale across much bigger businesses than mine, and that could help the real estate sector reduce their overall impact on the environment, which, by the way, if you look at the number of different reports, whether it's construction or operational carbon, is responsible for 40% of all carbon emissions worldwide. So it's a pretty big issue.
Yeah, indeed. And I had a lot of friends and partners at COP26 in Glasgow, and I was just astounded to learn that apparently there's 130 trillion US dollars of global capital earmarked for deployment to drive net zero carbon in the coming years. And you'll also be aware that net zero carbon commitments in Asia Pacific are set to more than double from this year onward. And ESG, sustainability in a real estate context, that is now a top 3 consideration for almost everyone in real estate, and that's moved up from somewhere between 5 to 7 in organizations' wish lists from a couple of years ago. So it certainly sounds to me that you're pivoting or evolving into what is going to be the hottest space, or certainly one of the hottest spaces in the industry for the coming years. Alex, is there anything specific that you're looking at or that you see that you think are particular opportunity areas? I mean, we can hear from you generally in that, or in specific locations like Hong Kong.
Yeah, I mean, it's, Undivided Ventures, which is the new platform. I've actually partnered with a gentleman out of Cambridge University who has been working and researching sustainability in the built environment for many, many years. So we've been working together about a year and a half on this. And he's taught me an incredible amount. I mean, I'm by no means a sustainability expert. He is. But what I do know is I know the way that as a developer and as an investor, you look at these issues. And one of the ways that I would look at these issues as a developer is to say, what is the risk on my portfolio if I don't invest in ways in which I can reduce or mitigate some of the risks involved with this climate crisis. And a lot of the time that's solved by technology. In a Hong Kong context, if I talked to local developers about this problem 3 or 4 years ago, I probably would have been laughed out of the room. I think to your point, this is changing quite dramatically. I think Xi Jinping came out, I think it was last year, and said that China wanted to reach net zero by 2060. I think the way that China operates, that they will, for all intents and purposes, reach that target much quicker than 2060, but essentially that's the target. And off the back of that, again, with real estate being such a large segment of the problem, I think a lot of local developers in Hong Kong and a lot of local institutions who operate here are taking this very, very seriously. And so, again, the conversation has changed quite dramatically, at least in the circles I operate in, especially, and I'm sure the circles that you operate in too, within the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, I love the cliche, but I'm going to use it anyway, that finally green means dollars. I've seen, and it's been really interesting to watch this space evolve. I mean, I think we've seen a lot of well-intended organizations over the last decade deploying various different types of solutions, either in existing or new assets, to achieve ratings. And in many cases, a lot of those solutions just haven't been fit for purpose or fit for location. That seems to be changing dramatically now, and that bespoke or location or situation-specific solutions are out there, and how sustainability and technology are melding together, I find incredibly interesting.
I think that technology in large part holds a lot of the solution, right? And when I talk about technology, I also mean not just software, but obviously hardware and materials. The way that, at least with Undivided, we look at sustainability as in operational carbon, and then there's embodied carbon within the construction process. And I find actually that the biggest opportunity is embodied carbon. I think it's going to take a long time to have the biggest effect on that particular space, on the construction space. But I think that essentially is the biggest opportunity, whether it's new builds or retrofits. The global population is still increasing, and we're still going to have to develop. So how do we do it in a way that we're not affecting the planet in a negative manner that we have been doing for the last however many years? And I think that is a massive opportunity moving forward, although I think it's going to take a little bit longer solving that particular issue than it will solving the operational carbon space.
Yeah, could you talk a little more about that, please? Because when I think about what you've just said, increasing demand, shortage of space, to me, the solution lies in rebirthing existing assets that are better fit for purpose in the modern era. Technology makes that a lot easier than it did even 5 years ago. But could you just tell us a little bit more what you mean around the carbon points you were talking about there?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, if we really want to get to net zero, we should not be building any more buildings. I mean, that's really the crux of it. But the reality is that we are going to probably have to build more structures, at least in the context of a place like Hong Kong, where, you've got a limited land mass and, a large population that, for all intents and purposes, will probably increase over the next few years. When I started District 15 with my business partner, we looked at ways that we could reposition assets to make them more interesting or make them, better fit for living or working. So this is really a follow-on from that. How do we take existing assets in an ideal scenario and actually retrofit them in a way that they can be used in a sustainable manner? Because, again, if you're redeveloping, the amount of carbon which you are using is pretty dramatic. And what we need to find is solutions where we can retrofit assets, but at the same time keep up with the population growth in these urban cities. I mean, I think that we've been through a very difficult time of COVID over the last 24 months. And a lot of people within the real estate sector saying, are people going to still live in cities? Are cities still going to be a place people want to come? And I think that the last 6 to 12 months has proved that actually with COVID subsiding in other geographies around the world, people are still moving back to cities. People want to be in urban centers. And I think that we're going to have to, again, have solutions that are fit for purpose.
Yeah, we're seeing evidence of that all around the world. I mean, cities are coming back to life, and certainly outside of Hong Kong at the moment. I mean, we're all speaking with friends and partners who are, if not back to normal life, getting close to where they were at before the pandemic, which is great to hear. But yeah, I mean, it does seem that the pressure for new development is going to build again very quickly, and marrying that appetite or that need with the necessary goals that were set in Glasgow last year is going to pose some serious challenges. Hong Kong, which a market that I've spent a lot of time in and, have enjoyed a lot of time in through my career. You were born here. Incredibly, some of the most successful real estate groups, including your own, extremely sound financially, just a low pressure market from that respect, but has never really been, certainly not in the last 10 years, probably never really been an absolute early adopter of new things and new ideas. Do you have any thoughts on what needs to change here, particularly from a sustainability and technology perspective in the mindsets of the broader owner community here that gets Hong Kong back out in front of that again? Or do you think we continue to just listen and wait and watch and develop behind what's happening in the rest of the world?
I think it's a tough one because I've always thought that Hong Kong could be such an innovator with so many different technologies. I think that they missed a beat when it came to electric cars. I think they could have really pushed that, and then they stopped the legislation on that. I don't necessarily blame developers in Hong Kong. I mean, this is a bit controversial, I suppose, but I blame the government in the sense that the building department here is stuck in what I would call a time warp. And it's from sort of 1960s UK planning booklet, which I think during the colonial times was basically laid out the planning framework for Hong Kong and the building department framework, and they haven't moved on. So we are quite restricted as developers and investors as to what we can actually build. I think this is an issue worldwide, but more particularly in Hong Kong, I found, is that when you're talking about materials and new materials we need to use in order to, again, reduce carbon output in construction, I think there's regulation issues which just haven't caught up with some of the new technologies. And I think that unless regulation is more open to that, unless building departments, again, not just in Hong Kong, but worldwide, more up to speed on what we need to be doing in terms of that, then it's going to be an uphill battle for a lot of developers, whether they want to bring in something innovative or not. They might just be simply restricted from doing it by the regulation at the time.
And it will be interesting to see how or if that changes. And I've always felt that the competitive landscape, I mean, it's beginning to become more competitive, and competitive pressure is always generally good for driving innovation and change. And, I'm a little optimistic that that will bring some benefits to the market with respect to environmentally friendly development.
One of the issues in Hong Kong is that you've got some of the highest real estate prices in the world. So when I started my business, it was much more accessible to become a boutique developer. prices were much lower and costs were much, much lower. Today, if I was starting out, I wouldn't put much hope on myself of doing that unless I had a very rich backer in that endeavor. And I think the competition absolutely moves markets and absolutely creates an innovation. But the unfortunate thing is that price is also an obstacle to that, and cost is an obstacle. And when you're dealing with the kind of costs that you need in order to just build a building in Hong Kong, it's very difficult to see how any boutique developer can come in and really change the game. And also margins are very thin, right? So you got to be very, very careful about what innovation you risk, because that risk could affect your overall margin.
I think that's a really interesting point. And I wonder, I mean, if you don't mind, I just want to pick around that a little bit more with you. So do you mean boutique developers? I mean, I think there are plenty of opportunities on small schemes and pocket sites in Hong Kong. But I would agree with you that the commitment now relative to even 20, 30 years, between 20 and 30 years ago to get in the game, it's just so much more than it was. I mean, the market is more or less appreciated. There have been some bumps since 2000, 2001, but it's, broadly speaking, it's appreciated since then. So, I mean, there are boutique opportunities, but they're not really at boutique prices, right?
They're definitely not at boutique prices. I mean, if you're talking about in Hong Kong, I would say a small site, which, a lot of the small developers are working on, is about just over 2,000 square feet site area. Now, depending on what geography you're in, on a 2,000 square foot site area, if you're building resi, you can probably build about 9 times, let's say. So you're looking at 18,000 square feet of gross floor area they're building. You won't get that for anything less than probably $10,000 AV. So you're talking about 180 million Hong Kong dollars. And then you're looking at 5,000 to 6,000. If you're doing something innovative, probably a $6,000 build cost. So that's 16,000 all in cost, but that's not including financing costs or stamp duties or, anything like that. So, you're up towards the $20,000 GFA cost before you've even started marketing. And that's a big lump sum. And it's very difficult to see how a first-time boutique developer can get in the game like that and do something really unique and different.
I absolutely agree. So Alex, just sort of pivoting away a little bit to sustainability and or technology again, and sort of aiming toward wrapping up. Lots and lots of tech and sustainability-oriented tech, as we've discussed, impacting the real estate world at the moment. On the services side, you've got the race to automated valuations, the race to automated transactions. There's a ton of tech around the operation and management of assets that's de-risking, a lot of what was traditionally difficult in asset management, as well as taking human personnel off-site as well. And then you've got real estate in the metaverse. There's just so much to talk about in this space. But I just wanted to ask you if you have a view, it's unrestricted to Hong Kong, it can be anywhere. What's going to have the biggest impact if you had to place a bet now on the industry in the next 5 years in either the technology or the sustainability sphere?
I think that you've got to break it down and look at interim technologies and then longer term technologies. And if I was a betting man, I would say that the interim technologies that are really going to garner the most upside within the shorter term are going to be technologies around carbon measurement and output. And, we still haven't really figured out, at least I haven't seen a technology yet that does this conclusively, is to really measure the overall carbon output from start of a building all the way to end of life on what that carbon output is for a particular asset. I mean, we've got benchmarks and we've got ideas and we can look at back to comps and things like that. But if you're looking at one particular asset and you're saying, okay, how much carbon is that asset expelling during the lifetime of that particular project? We don't have any technology that does that yet. Because at the end of the day, we're still sort of at the beginning of this process. I know all these net zero goals have been talked about and people are saying they're going to reach net zero by, I think in the UK, a lot of developers are saying by 2030. But if you really talk to these developers, I think a lot of them are still at the beginning of their journey. And so they want to know how to measure, how to benchmark, and then how does that relate to their peers? I would think for a longer term strategy, as I said at the beginning of this call, what I'm really interested in is materials and how we use materials to reduce carbon output within the construction phase. And I put materials under technology because I think there are also technology advancements. And so I find that super interesting, but that's going to take a little bit longer, I think, to develop, employ, and then also get through regulation to be able to actually use. But I think that's super exciting longer term.
Yeah, no, I mean, particularly just coming back to what you said about measuring carbon from pillar to post in the life cycle of the building and the impact that that's going to have on value, which is what's really going to, play a huge role in driving the industry to look for those sorts of statistics. I completely agree with you.
I talked to an unnamed bank recently who told me that next year, so 2023, they are potentially going to increase the cost of funds for developers, for institutions who are looking to get financing on assets if they don't meet certain targets. And those targets are going to go beyond just an ESG checklist and going to start looking at actually what is the carbon output of your particular operations within asset and how you can reduce that, because I think it's becoming a massive risk.
Well, thank you, Alex. It's been tremendous having you on the show today. I think a lot of topics talked about that will certainly inform the future of real estate. And I hope that down the track we can have you back in the show to pick up on what we've chatted about today and everything else that Undivided Ventures is getting up to. Thanks again, and I appreciate your time. So that's a wrap for today's podcast. And it just leaves it for me to thank you very much for tuning in and listening to our conversation. And as I mentioned at the beginning, if you'd like any information or you want to have a chat, drop me a line on Gavin R. Morgan at propnext.com, GavinRMorgan at propnext.com. Or there's more information, as I said earlier, too, on www.propnext.com. That's www.propnext.com. I look forward to speaking with you in future podcasts, hopefully, and thank you again for your time.